The night was calm, the kind of stillness that only small American towns seem to hold when the world has gone to sleep. The air was crisp with the bite of autumn, carrying the faint smell of burning firewood from distant chimneys. Streetlights stretched their glow across empty roads, but most of the town was quiet, tucked away under the blanket of darkness. Officer Daniel Hayes, a seasoned patrol officer with 10 years on the force, leaned back in his cruiser, eyes scanning the familiar streets for anything out of place. It had been an uneventful evening, and part of him welcomed it. After years of night shifts, Daniel knew that quiet often meant safety. Still, there was something about the silence tonight that felt heavier than usual, almost as if the night was holding its breath. And it happened. A shadow darted across the far end of the road, catching the edge of his headlights. Daniel instinctively straightened, hands tightening on the wheel. His first thought was a deer, or maybe a stray raccoon, but as the figure moved closer, he realized it was a dog, a large German shepherd. Its gait was uneven, frantic, not the confident stride of a well-fed pet, but the hurried, desperate run of an animal that had been wandering too long. The shepherd didn't hesitate when it saw the cruiser. Instead of bolting away like most strays would, the dog headed straight toward him, paws pounding against the asphalt. Daniel frowned, his instincts sharpening. He had worked with K9 South early in his career, training alongside police dogs that had saved lives and stopped criminals. He knew their intelligence. And he knew this wasn't normal. The shepherd slowed as it reached the cruiser, chest heaving, tongue lolling out as it panted. Dirt matted its fur, and its ribs were faintly visible beneath its coat. But what struck Daniel the most were the eyes, amber, piercing, and filled with something he couldn't ignore. Not fear, not aggression, but urgency. "Easy, boy?" Daniel muttered, rolling down his window slightly. The shepherd let out a sharp whine and pawed at the driver's side door, claws scraping against the metal. The sound was desperate, almost human in its insistence. Daniel's brow furrowed. Animals didn't act like this unless they needed something. Unless they were trying to tell you something, against his better judgment, and against protocol that warned officers never to leave their vehicles for unpredictable strays. Daniel shut off the engine and stepped out. The cold air hit him, but what hit harder was the way the shepherd immediately approached, tail low but not tucked, body tense but not hostile. The dog closed the distance quickly and nudged its nose against Daniel's leg, whining again, then tugged lightly at his uniform sleeve with its teeth. Daniel froze. This wasn't random. The shepherd wasn't looking for food, wasn't begging for scraps. It was asking him to follow. For a moment, the officer stood there, torn between logic and instinct. Logic told him he was standing in the middle of the street at night, letting a stray dog lead him into who knew what situation. Instinct told him there was more here, something that demanded his attention. He had learned long ago that ignoring instinct was often the biggest mistake an officer could make. The shepherd took a few steps forward, then looked back, eyes locking on Daniel's as if to say, "Well, are you coming?" Daniel let out a slow breath and adjusted the flashlight strapped to his belt. "All right," he whispered under his breath. "Show me what's so important." The dog barked once, sharp and insistent, then turned and trotted down the road. Daniel followed cautiously, every sense on alert. His boots crunched against fallen leaves, the sound oddly loud in the stillness of the night. The shepherd didn't stray too far ahead. Instead, it paused every few yards, glancing back to ensure Daniel was still behind. It felt surreal. A dance between man and dog in the middle of empty streets, under the glow of a half-moon sky. Each step pulled Daniel further from the safety of his cruiser, and deeper into curiosity. As they walked, Daniel's mind wandered. He thought about his early years with Rex, his old K9 partner, a shepherd not unlike this one. Rex had been fearless, loyal to a fault, and sharp as a blade. Together, they had tracked suspects, found missing children, and even once saved a man trapped after a car accident. Rex had been more than a dog. He had been a partner. When Rex retired and later passed away, Daniel had felt a hollow space inside him, one that no other partner or pet had been able to fill. Now, watching this stray, Daniel felt a strange familiarity. It was as though fate had dropped this moment into his lap. A test, perhaps, or a second chance. The shepherd barked again, sharper this time, snapping Daniel back to the present. They had reached the end of Main Street, where the glow of streetlights faded and the road gave way to cracked pavement leading toward the outskirts of town. Ahead loomed the dark silhouette of abandoned warehouses, relics from the town's once thriving manufacturing days. Most officers avoided this area at night. It was too easy for trouble to hide in the shadows. Daniel slowed, narrowing his eyes. "Where are you taking me?" He muttered. The shepherd's pace quickened, its urgency growing. It wasn't afraid of the shadows ahead. It wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was leading him with purpose. Daniel adjusted his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, and tightened his grip on the handle. He could feel his pulse quicken. The air grew colder as they neared the old industrial lot. Rusted fences surrounded the warehouses, their chain links sagging, half swallowed by weeds. The faint smell of oil and rust clung to the night air. A place forgotten by time, but perhaps not forgotten by everyone. The shepherd stopped suddenly at the entrance, turning back to Daniel with another whine. Its amber eyes caught the faint light, shimmering with a message. Daniel still couldn't fully understand, but felt pressed to obey. This was no longer just an odd encounter. Something was waiting ahead. Daniel straightened, every fiber of his being on alert. He knew he should call it in, radio dispatch, and wait for backup. But something deep inside whispered that waiting wasn't an option. Whatever this dog wanted him to see couldn't wait another minute. With a final glance at the empty road behind him, Daniel nodded once. "All right," he said softly, voice steady though his heart pounded. "Lead the way." The shepherd barked in response, then darted forward into the shadows of the lot, and Officer Daniel Hayes followed. The crunch of gravel echoed under Daniel's boots as he followed the German shepherd deeper into the forgotten outskirts of town. The night felt colder here, as though the shadows carried a chill of their own. Streetlights had long since vanished, leaving only the pale glow of the moon to guide his way. The beam of his flashlight cut through patches of darkness, catching glimpses of rusted chain-link fences and broken windows that stared back like hollow eyes. The shepherd moved with determination. It wasn't the erratic wandering of a stray, searching for scraps. No, this was purposeful. The dog trotted a few yards ahead, then paused, turning its head to make sure Daniel followed. Each time the officer slowed, the shepherd stopped, ears perked, waiting with nervous urgency. Daniel's mind wrestled with the strangeness of it all. He had encountered strays before, dogs that barked at him, growled from a distance, or bolted at the first sign of a human approach. But this one? This shepherd seemed to know him, or at least know that he was the one person who might listen. It wasn't fear in those amber eyes. It was desperation mixed with trust. "All right, buddy," Daniel murmured under his breath, voice low. "I'm here. Just show me where." The shepherd whined in response, a soft, guttural sound that sent a pang through Daniel's chest. Then the dog turned and pressed forward, leading him down a cracked asphalt path that veered toward the industrial lot. The area was notorious. Old warehouses, once buzzing with workers decades ago, now sat abandoned, left to decay under the weight of time and neglect. Teenagers sometimes snuck in to spray paint walls or scare themselves with ghost stories, but mostly the place was empty, a graveyard of broken industry. Officers were called here occasionally, usually for trespassers or the occasional fire started by squatters trying to stay warm. But tonight, the stillness felt heavier, almost suffocating. Daniel tightened his grip on his flashlight, every sense sharpened. His training screamed caution. He should have called for backup the moment the shepherd veered toward the warehouses. But he couldn't bring himself to stop. Something inside told him this wasn't the kind of situation where waiting would do any good. The shepherd barked once, the sharp sound echoing against rusted metal walls. Daniel froze for a second, scanning the shadows. His hand hovered near the holster at his hip. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No figures. Just the restless dog, pacing in front of him as if urging him to hurry. "Easy," Daniel said, more to himself than the shepherd. No rush into trouble, but the shepherd wouldn't wait. With a sudden burst of energy, it ran several yards ahead, disappearing briefly into the darkness. Panic flared in Daniel's chest, and he jogged forward, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly across broken pavement. When the shepherd reappeared, it stopped near a collapsed chain-link fence. Beyond the gap, weeds grew tall, swallowing the edges of a narrow path. The dog barked again, then squeezed through the opening without hesitation. Daniel crouched, pushing the fence aside to follow. The air on the other side was thick with the scent of rust and mildew. Every step stirred the silence, his boots crunching against scattered debris. The shepherd stayed just ahead, never straying too far. Daniel noticed the way its body moved, tense, alert, tail stiff, but not fearful. The dog wasn't leading him into danger. It was leading him towards something else. Something hidden. Something important. "Where are you taking me?" Daniel whispered, though the only response was another whine as the shepherd turned sharply to the right. Slipping behind the remains of an old loading dock. Daniel followed, sweeping his flashlight over crumbling concrete and broken pallets. The night pressed down on him, the weight of emptiness making his skin prickle. He glanced back once toward the road. The glow of the cruiser was gone, swallowed by distance and darkness. He was alone now, just him and the dog, yet strangely, he didn't feel abandoned. The shepherd paused again, this time staring directly at him. Their eyes met in the faint light, and Daniel felt the strangest sensation, as though the dog was communicating. There was intelligence there, a plea for trust. He nodded slowly, almost without realizing it. "Okay, I'm with you," satisfied. The shepherd turned and trotted toward a structure at the far edge of the lot, a shed, or what was left of one. Its roof sagged dangerously. One wall caved in, and a faint smell of rot seeped from within. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whatever was in there wasn't good. The shepherd barked again, louder this time, scratching at the entrance before slipping through a gap in the wall. Daniel's pulse hammered. He raised his flashlight, stepping carefully over broken boards. Inside, the beam swept across darkness. Piles of trash, rusted cans, scraps of cloth. The air was thick, damp, almost suffocating. For a heartbeat, all he heard was silence. Then came the sound, a faint whimper, soft, fragile, almost lost beneath the creak of the wind against the broken structure. Daniel's breath caught. He froze, straining to hear. There it was again, a tiny, pitiful cry, the kind of sound that pierced straight through the heart. The shepherd whined urgently, pushing deeper into the shadows. Its tail wagged once, not in joy but in anxious relief, as though it had finally shown him what it needed. Daniel's flashlight followed the dog's movement, and then landed on the source. Two tiny shapes huddled against a filthy blanket, their bodies trembling. Puppies, barely more than skin and bones, their ribs visible, their eyes dull with weakness. They whimpered again, trying to shift but too frail to move much. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. His chest tightened with a mixture of sorrow and anger. The realization hit like a punch. The shepherd hadn't run to him for food or safety for himself. He had been running for them. For his babies. The mother, because Daniel now knew without a doubt this was their mother, rushed to them instantly. She nosed each puppy, licking their frail bodies, whining softly as though trying to comfort them. Then she turned back to Daniel, eyes wide, filled with a plea more powerful than words that helped them. For a long moment, Daniel just stood there, flashlight trembling in his hand. His training as an officer told him to remain calm, assess the situation, and call for backup. But his heart, the human part of him, the part that remembered Rex and knew what dogs were capable of, broke in two at the sight. He lowered himself to one knee, the beam of light steady on the tiny lives struggling in front of him. "I see them," he whispered, his voice rough. "I see them, girl. Don't worry. I won't leave them." The shepherd whined again, nudging the weakest puppy closer to his hand, as if to say, "Take them. Save them." And in that moment, Daniel Hayes knew his night had changed forever. What had begun as an ordinary patrol had become something much more, a desperate mission, led by a mother's unbreakable love and trust in a stranger. This was no longer routine. This was a rescue. The night swallowed Daniel and the German shepherd as they stepped deeper into the forgotten industrial district. The hum of the town had faded entirely now. No traffic, no voices, not even the buzz of streetlights. Just the hollow sound of wind whistling through broken metal and weeds scratching against cracked concrete. It felt like stepping into another world, one that had been abandoned and left to rot. The shepherd's paws padded quickly over the uneven ground, nails clicking against the pavement. Daniel's boots crunched louder, breaking the silence, his flashlight beams sweeping in tight arcs across the lot. Rusted shipping containers stood like silent sentinels, their paint peeling, graffiti scrawled across the surfaces. Bent fences leaned precariously, eaten alive by vines and rust. Daniel's hand instinctively hovered near his holster. He wasn't just an officer tonight. He was a man walking blind into the unknown. He had no clue what waited for him here. Normally, he would have called for backup before even stepping foot into this zone. But something about the dog's urgency, about the faint cries of those puppies still echoing in his ears, kept him moving forward without hesitation. The shepherd barked once, the sound sharp and commanding, before dashing ahead toward a sagging structure that looked more like a ghost than a building. It was an old storage shed, its roof partially collapsed, rust bleeding down the walls. The door hung crookily from one hinge, creaking each time the wind shifted. Daniel approached slowly, flashlight raised. The closer he came, the heavier the air grew, thick with mildew and something sour, decay. His stomach tightened. The shepherd whined urgently at the entrance, scratching at the wood with frantic claws, then slipped inside through a jagged opening where the wall had given way. "All right," Daniel muttered, steadying his breath. He crouched and pushed the warped door aside, stepping into the shadows. The beam of his flashlight cut across the interior. Piles of old furniture, broken boards, and trash filled the corners. Rat droppings littered the ground. The smell was overwhelming, a cocktail of rust, mold, and something far more unsettling. Daniel's gut told him this was not just a den for strays. Someone had been here before, someone careless enough to leave a trail of neglect behind. Then he heard it again. That faint whimper dot, it was even softer now, fragile and heartbreaking. Daniel froze, head tilted, ears straining. The shepherd's whine answered, guiding his attention toward the far corner. He swung his flashlight, and there they were again. The two puppies, trembling against a filthy blanket. The sight nearly buckled him. He had seen plenty in his years as an officer. Crime scenes, accidents, tragedies that etched themselves into memory. But this? Two fragile lives clinging to existence. their mother frantically guarding them in a crumbling shed, was a different kind of devastation. The shepherd rushed to them, nudging each pup gently, licking their frail bodies, her tail wagging once before stiffening with worry. She looked back at Daniel, eyes shimmering in the light, and he understood her plea as clearly as if she'd spoken. "Please, help them." Daniel knelt slowly, careful not to startle her. His flashlight beam illuminated the tiny ribs pressing against paper-thin skin, the dullness of their eyes, the weakness in their limbs. These weren't just neglected puppies. They were on the brink. His chest tightened as anger rose like a flame. Whoever had left them here hadn't just abandoned them. They had sentenced them to death. He reached out, hand steady. The shepherd didn't growl. She didn't snap. Instead, she stepped aside, nudging the smallest pup closer toward him as if presenting her most precious treasure. Daniel's throat tightened. This wasn't just trust. It was surrender. A desperate mother handing her children to a stranger because she had no other choice. "You're a brave girl," Daniel whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Braver than most people I know." The pup whimpered weakly as Daniel cupped it gently in his hands. It was so light, frighteningly so, and its tiny body shivered against his palm. He quickly shrugged off his jacket and tucked the puppy inside for warmth. The shepherd licked his hand once, a gesture so filled with gratitude it nearly undid him. The second pup shifted feebly, its breathing shallow. Daniel scooped it up too, holding both close to his chest. His flashlight clattered softly to the ground as he balanced them against his body, relying on the faint moonlight filtering through the broken roof. The shepherd hovered close, pressing her body against his legs, refusing to be separated from her babies. Daniel took a steadying breath. He knew the next steps had to be fast. These pups didn't have much time left. He needed to get them warm, hydrated, and under professional care immediately. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Empty cans scattered across the floor. An old stained blanket. A half-crushed water bottle in the corner. These weren't things a dog could have dragged in. Someone had been here recently. Daniel's stomach churned. Could it have been squatters? Or worse, had someone dumped the dogs here on purpose, leaving them to die? The thought burned in his chest like acid dot. He shifted the pups in his arms, one whimpering weakly against his jacket. "Not tonight," he muttered, voice fierce. "You're not dying out here tonight." The shepherd barked once, sharp and resolute, as if echoing his determination. Together, they stepped out of the shed. The cold night air hit Daniel's face like ice, but he barely felt it. His cruiser was a long walk back, and every step would matter. He tightened his hold on the pups, pressing them closer to his chest for warmth. The mother trotted beside him, never straying more than a foot away. The industrial lot stretched ahead like a labyrinth of decay, but Daniel no longer cared about the shadows lurking in corners. His only focus was keeping these tiny lives safe long enough to make it to help. The shepherd barked again, a low, encouraging sound that echoed across the empty lot. For the first time since this strange journey began, Daniel felt like he wasn't leading. He was being led, guided not just by instinct, but by the unshakable love of a mother who refused to give up Dot. And though the night pressed heavy and dark around him, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. Whatever had brought him here tonight wasn't coincidence. It was a call to action, Dot, and he had answered. Daniel crouched in the broken shed, his knees pressing against the cold, littered floor. The two tiny lives in his arms felt impossibly fragile. Their whimpers were faint, like small echoes fading in a vast cave, as though the sound itself was running out of strength. Each shallow breath made his chest tighten further. He had seen victims before, children hurt in accidents, lost hikers clinging to survival, but this was different. These puppies were innocent in the purest sense, yet they had been left here to wither away in the dark. The shepherd hovered beside him, her body trembling as much as her pups. Her nose pressed against his sleeve, urging him to move, to act quickly. Her amber eyes glistened in the faint moonlight, filtering through the cracked roof. They weren't just begging. They were demanding, pleading with a force only a mother could summon. Daniel shifted the pups gently inside his jacket, feeling the shivers against his chest. They weighed next to nothing. The thought made his throat tighten with anger. How long had they been here without food? Without water? And why had someone chosen this place, this forgotten corner of town, as their graveyard? He swept his flashlight across the shed again. The picture became clearer. Crushed cans scattered in the corner, some reeking faintly of stale beer. A torn blanket, stiff with filth. A broken chair shoved against the wall. This hadn't just been a random shelter. Someone had been here. Someone had chosen to abandon the dogs in a place where no one would hear their cries. The realization hit Daniel like ice water. It wasn't neglect born of ignorance. It was cruelty born of choice. His jaw clenched. He could almost picture it. Someone leaving the mother and her babies here, maybe telling themselves it was better this way, or maybe not caring at all. Walking away without looking back, knowing full well that without help, they wouldn't last more than a few days. Daniel had seen darkness in people before, but seeing its result reflected in the fragile bodies of these pups made his stomach turn. He looked down at the shepherd. She pressed closer to him, resting her head briefly against his knee before nudging one of the pups tucked inside his jacket. She wasn't thinking about herself. Her ribs showed beneath her fur, her body clearly starved, yet all her focus was on them. She had fought, scavenged, survived, not for herself, but to bring him here. To save them. Daniel felt his chest ache. "You're incredible," he whispered, voice breaking despite himself. "You're the only reason they're still here." The shepherd whined softly, licking his hand, then sat back on her haunches, her eyes never leaving his. For a long moment, Daniel stayed there, torn between heartbreak and rage. His training told him to remain objective, to file the scene, to call it in as a case of neglect or abandonment. But tonight, procedure felt hollow. These weren't just animals on a report. They were lives hanging in the balance. Lives that wouldn't last another hour if he wasted time. He reached for his radio with one hand, pressing the pups closer with the other. Static crackled as he switched to the local channel. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hayes," he said, keeping his voice steady though his heart pounded. "I've got an emergency. Abandoned animals, critical condition. 2 puppies, severely malnourished, and a German shepherd mother. I need animal rescue en route immediately." "Copy that, Hayes," came the dispatcher's calm reply. "We'll notify animal control and a rescue unit." "Location?" Daniel gave the details quickly, eyes still locked on the mother. "They'll need medical attention right away." "It's bad. Real bad. Understood. Hold tight. Help is on the way." The radio clicked off, leaving silence once more. Daniel looked down at the puppies, then at the shepherd, who had leaned against him, as if sensing the shift. He adjusted his jacket around the tiny bodies. They stirred weakly, letting out small sounds that made his heart twist. He leaned closer, whispering to them, as though his words could keep them tethered to life. "Hang in there, little ones. Don't give up on me now." The shepherd pressed her nose to the jacket, nuzzling her babies before letting out a low whine. Daniel stroked her head gently, fingers running through her matted fur. She leaned into the touch, her tail twitching once in exhausted gratitude. It was then Daniel noticed something else. Scars, faint but visible, along her sides. Old marks, the kind that didn't come from running through brush or scraping against fences. They looked like the legacy of neglect. Maybe beatings. Maybe worse. She had endured suffering long before tonight, yet here she was, standing tall, refusing to abandon her pups. Daniel felt anger burn in his chest again, hot and bitter. Whoever had done this hadn't just failed these animals. They had broken something sacred. They had tried to crush a spirit that refused to die. But looking into her eyes now, he realized they hadn't succeeded. She hadn't lost her will. She hadn't lost her faith. Somehow, against everything, she still trusted enough to run to him, to risk her life crossing streets and chasing down a stranger's car because her babies needed saving. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Not on my watch," he said firmly, voice low but steady. "They're not dying here. Not tonight." The shepherd's ears flicked, and for the briefest second, Daniel thought he saw understanding in her gaze. A silent agreement. Carefully, he rose to his feet, adjusting the pups against his chest. They whimpered faintly, tiny voices straining against exhaustion. He could feel their shallow breaths through his jacket. Every second mattered now. The shepherd followed immediately, her body brushing against his legs, as though afraid to let him out of reach. Daniel stepped out of the shed, the night air rushing against him like a slap. The lot stretched out before him, vast and empty, yet somehow heavier than before. He looked back once at the decaying building, anger simmering in his chest. This place had almost become their grave. But he wouldn't let it. He began the long walk back toward his cruiser, each step careful but purposeful. The mother padded silently beside him, head low, ears swiveling at every sound. She was exhausted, yet she kept pace, her loyalty unshaken. Daniel pressed the radio again as he walked. "Dispatch, tell Animal Control I'm bringing them out myself. No time to wait inside. They'll need immediate care when I arrive." "Copy that, Hayes," the dispatcher replied. "We'll have staff waiting at the shelter." Daniel exhaled, adjusting his grip on the pups. Their bodies were warm against his chest, but the warmth felt too fragile, too fleeting. He whispered again, more to himself than to them. "You're going to make it. You hear me? You're going to make it." The shepherd glanced up at him, her eyes reflecting faint light, filled with something that tightened his chest again. Hope. And for the first time that night, Daniel believed it too. The night air bit at Daniel's face as he stepped out of the abandoned lot, the fragile bundle of life pressed tight against his chest. The two puppies shifted faintly inside his jacket, their tiny bodies trembling with exhaustion. Every faint whimper was a reminder that the clock was ticking, that every second mattered. Beside him, the German shepherd mother kept close, brushing against his legs with every stride. Her ribs showed in the dim glow of the streetlights, but her posture was unwavering. Her ears flicked at every sound, as though daring the night to challenge her, as she escorted the only man who had answered her desperate plea. Daniel lengthened his stride, his boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. His police cruiser glimmered faintly ahead, its headlights casting pale beams across the empty lot. The sight gave him a surge of determination. "You're going to make it," he murmured to the pups, his voice low but resolute. "We're almost there. Just hang on." The shepherd let out a small whine, almost as if echoing his words. Daniel glanced down at her, struck again by the raw emotion in her eyes. She wasn't running for herself. She wasn't following out of instinct. She was escorting him, entrusting him with everything she had left in this world. As they neared the cruiser, Daniel fumbled with one hand to pull the door handle. The metal creaked open, and warm air from the heater inside spilled out, washing over them like a lifeline. Carefully, he slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the pups inside his jacket so they were cradled against him. Their breaths were shallow, but the heater's warmth might give them the edge they needed. The shepherd didn't wait for an invitation. She leapt into the back seat, circling once before settling directly behind him, her eyes fixed on the puppies, as though refusing to blink. Daniel grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Hayes. I'm en route to the shelter with the animals now. ETA 10 minutes. Have medical staff ready. Puppies are critical, repeat, critical. Copy that, Hayes, the dispatcher replied. Rescue team is standing by. The radio clicked silent, and the engine roared to life. Daniel shifted into gear, his hand tightening on the wheel. The cruiser surged forward, tires crunching over debris before hitting the open road. Every red light felt like a threat. Every passing second weighed heavy, like a stone pressing deeper into his chest. He kept glancing down at his jacket, feeling the slight movements of the tiny bodies beneath. Each stir gave him hope. Each moment of stillness sent a bolt of fear through him. The shepherd whined softly from the back seat, leaning forward to press her nose against his shoulder. He reached back briefly, squeezing her muzzle gently before returning his focus to the road. I know, he whispered. We'll get them there. I promise. The town blurred past in streaks of yellow light and darkened storefronts. Most of the world slept, unaware of the desperate battle playing out inside his cruiser. Daniel's mind raced with fragments of memory. His days in the K-9 unit, the bond he'd once shared with his partner, Rex, the way a dog's trust could anchor a man in the darkest of times. And now, here he was again, entrusted with another life. No, 3 of them, hanging by a thread. His grip tightened on the wheel. He wouldn't fail them. At one point, the pups shifted again, one letting out a weak, wheezing cry. Daniel nearly pulled over right then, panic flaring in his chest. But the shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding, her eyes flashing in the rearview mirror. It was as though she was telling him to keep going. That stopping wasn't an option. Daniel exhaled sharply, nodding to himself. You're right. Hold on, little ones. Just a few more minutes. The road stretched endlessly, yet he could see the glow of the shelter's floodlights in the distance. Relief surged through him, tempered by the urgency pounding in his veins. He flicked the siren on, the wail cutting through the night air, parting the empty roads ahead. The sound was more than protocol. It was a cry for survival. When he finally pulled into the shelter's lot, 2 staff members were already outside, bundled in coats against the cold, carrying medical kits. Their faces shifted from concern to urgency the moment they saw him leap from the cruiser with the bundle in his arms. 2 pups, barely hanging on, Daniel called out, his voice hoarse. Mother's in the back. She's weak, but stable. They need fluids and warmth now. The staff members hurried forward, one taking the puppies with practiced care, the other gently coaxing the shepherd from the back seat. But the mother refused to budge until she saw her pups in the carrier. Only then did she step out, pressing against Daniel's side as though to say, Don't let them out of your sight. Inside, the shelter's emergency room buzzed with motion. Heat lamps flickered on, 4 lines prepared, tiny blankets laid out. Daniel stood back, his fists clenched, his chest heaving as he watched the staff spring into action. The shepherd stayed at his side, her body taut, eyes glued to her babies as the staff worked. Daniel knelt beside her, resting a steadying hand on her shoulder. They're in good hands now, he whispered, though his own voice betrayed the tremor of uncertainty. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Each beep of the monitors, each hushed command from the vet, carried the weight of life or death. Daniel's eyes burned, though he refused to look away. He had sworn to protect, to serve, and in this moment, protecting meant standing vigil beside a desperate mother who had already given everything she had left. Finally, one of the vets looked up, sweat glistening on her forehead. They're critical, but stable for now. We've got fluids running. Next few hours will tell us everything. Daniel exhaled, his knees nearly buckling with relief. He felt the shepherd press against him, releasing a low whine. He stroked her head gently, whispering, You did it. You got them here. The vet smiled faintly. If you hadn't brought them in when you did, they wouldn't have made it through the night. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing down at the mother. Her amber eyes shimmered with exhaustion, but also something else. Gratitude, trust, hope. In that moment, Daniel realized he hadn't just saved them. They had saved something in him too. A reminder of why he wore the badge, why he never turned away from a call for help, no matter the form it took. As the night stretched on, Daniel stayed right where he was. The shepherd curled at his feet, her breathing finally slowing into something steady. For the first time since that desperate knock on his cruiser door, he allowed himself to believe they had a fighting chance. And he silently vowed he wouldn't leave their side until they did. The warmth of the shelter felt like a fragile cocoon compared to the bitter night air outside. Daniel watched as the staff worked with intense focus, each movement precise, each breath measured. Fluids dripped into the tiny veins of the puppies. Heat lamps cast a golden glow over their shivering bodies, and soft blankets cushioned them from the harsh cold of their journey. Yet despite the warmth and safety, Daniel couldn't shake the fragile tension that filled the room. These puppies were hanging by a thread, and he could feel it in every small, shallow breath. The mother, Grace, a name the staff had given her in the chaos of arrival, sat stiffly beside him, her amber eyes locked on the pups, as if the slightest movement elsewhere might spell disaster. Her body was still thin, ribs pressing faintly through matted fur, yet she radiated a quiet intensity that Daniel couldn't help but admire. Every muscle in her frame was poised for vigilance. Every ear flicked at the softest whimper. She had fought to get them here, and now she refused to leave their side. Daniel leaned against the counter, exhaustion clawing at him. His boots were dusty, his uniform wrinkled from hours of movement, yet his gaze never left the small trio before him. It wasn't just a job anymore. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a fight for life, and he felt personally responsible. The first puppy stirred weakly, letting out a tiny squeak. Daniel's heart jumped. He adjusted the blanket around it, smoothing it gently against his palm. Its little body was warm now, but just barely. The staff murmured encouraging words, rubbing their tiny paws, checking vitals, and whispering reassurances like they could infuse life with language alone. The second pup remained almost motionless, eyes half closed, its breathing shallow. Daniel knelt beside it, resting a hand against the fragile chest. He felt the faint thrum of life, but it was so delicate, it seemed as though the smallest disruption could snuff it out. He whispered softly, "You're stronger than you look. Stay with me. Don't give up now." Grace pressed closer, nudging the puppies gently with her nose, licking them softly, her own breathing ragged with exhaustion. She had been awake for hours, perhaps even days without proper rest, yet there was no slackening of her vigilance. She had endured hunger, neglect, and fear, but her determination was unbroken. Daniel felt a wave of respect and sorrow sweep through him. Hours passed in tense silence. Daniel barely moved, fearing even the slightest disturbance might upset the fragile balance of survival. He watched the monitors, noting every twitch, every shallow breath. His mind replayed the scene from the abandoned lot, the desperation in the shepherd's eyes, the shivering of the pups, the stark realization that their lives had hung on a single thread. He remembered the sound of the smallest pup's faint whimper as it had clutched at life, and the raw intensity of Grace's plea for help. That memory drove him to stay by their side, unwilling to leave even for a moment. He refused to let them endure this battle alone. Shelter staff moved with practiced efficiency around him. They explained the procedure: hydration, monitoring temperature, checking for parasites, and slowly feeding once the pups regained enough strength. But Daniel could see the weight of uncertainty on every face. Even with the best care, survival was not guaranteed. At one point, Grace shifted restlessly, pressing her body closer to the tiny creatures, letting out a low whine. Daniel reached over instinctively, stroking her head. "It's okay," he whispered. "You've done everything right. They're safe now. I've got you." She pressed her head against his shoulder briefly and turned back to nuzzle her pups. The bond between them was unbreakable, and Daniel felt both awe and responsibility settle on him like a heavy coat. He realized then that he wasn't just a protector in this moment. He was a witness to the raw, unyielding power of love and survival. Time stretched, each hour feeling like a day. The puppies shifted slightly, showing subtle signs of improvement. A faint rise in their chests, a flicker of movement, a small whimper that signaled awareness. Daniel's pulse quickened with each tiny victory. He allowed himself the briefest moments of hope, though he refused to relax entirely. He had learned long ago that hope without vigilance was fragile. By dawn, the first signs of real change became visible. One puppy managed a weak attempt to crawl toward Grace, who nudged it encouragingly. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. It was progress, small, tentative, but undeniable. The staff whispered congratulations to each other, though their expressions were still cautious. Survival, they knew, could not be assumed. But the faint warmth radiating from the pups' bodies was a tangible sign that tonight, at least, they had won a battle. Daniel remained by Grace's side, gently scratching behind her ears, whispering words of encouragement both to her and the tiny creatures she had fought to protect. He had seen fear, neglect, and cruelty during his time on the force, but nothing matched the vulnerability and determination playing out here. It was raw, intimate, and powerful beyond description. He reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the moment the shepherd had run to his cruiser, desperate and insistent, he had felt a tug on something deeper than duty. Now he understood why. She had led him not just to her babies, but to a lesson in resilience, trust, and love. Lesson that would stay with him long after the night had ended. As the sun began to rise, painting the room in soft orange light, Daniel allowed himself a small breath of relief. The immediate danger had passed. The fight for survival was far from over, but tonight, at least, they had a chance. Grace settled beside him, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. Her amber eyes never left the pups, but the tension in her body eased slightly. Daniel mirrored her relaxation, though his heart still carried the echoes of fear and urgency. "This isn't over," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "But you're going to make it. I promise." He stroked Grace's head gently again, feeling her lean into the touch. The bond between them had grown stronger in the night, a connection born not of circumstance, but of trust earned in the harshest conditions. Daniel realized that, for the first time in a long while, he understood what it meant to truly fight for life alongside someone else. Hours later, as the puppies began to stir more vigorously, Daniel finally allowed himself to step back slightly. He had spent nearly the entire night at their side, watching, guiding, and protecting. Yet even in the small respite, he knew the journey was far from complete. The road ahead would be long, filled with continued care, medical treatment, and vigilance. But for the first time since the desperate dash through the abandoned lot, Daniel felt a spark of hope. He had witnessed the raw power of survival, the unyielding will of a mother, and the delicate thread by which life sometimes hangs. And he knew, as long as he remained by their side, that thread would hold. Grace nudged his hand gently, breaking his reverie. Her gaze locked with his, amber eyes shining with quiet understanding. Daniel smiled faintly, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the shelter's heat lamps. In that simple, silent exchange, he knew they had formed an unspoken pact. He would protect them, and they would survive. Together. And for Daniel, that was more than enough to face whatever came next. By morning, the shelter was bathed in a soft golden light that streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the sunbeams. The night had been long and grueling, But the first tangible signs of hope had arrived. The two puppies, once pale and barely moving, had begun to stir with newfound strength. Their tiny bodies twitched, pushing against the warmth of their blankets. One even attempted a weak crawl toward Grace, who nudged it gently, tail wagging with cautious relief. Daniel watched, heart tightening, as the scene unfolded. He had never witnessed such resilience before. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A deeper, more confident breath, a faint flicker of energy in the limbs, tiny cries of curiosity replacing feeble whimpers. But it was there. Life was asserting itself, stubbornly, defiantly. Grace remained perched beside the puppies, vigilant yet gradually relaxing into moments of rest. She would shift from side to side, pressing her body against her baby's to maintain warmth, then glance toward Daniel with those piercing amber eyes. They were no longer just eyes of desperation. Now they held gratitude, trust, and an unspoken bond. Daniel felt it acutely. This dog, abandoned, scarred, yet resilient, had chosen him as an ally in her fight for her family. He knelt beside her, stroking her matted fur. "You did it," he whispered softly. "You saved them. You're incredible." She leaned into his touch, resting her head against his shoulder for a brief moment. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a fragile but powerful connection between man and dog, forged in the intensity of life and death. Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the night he had first seen her running to his cruiser. Her urgency, her trust, her desperation, it had all led to this moment. She hadn't just sought help for herself. She had led him to her babies, guiding him through danger and uncertainty. He realized, with a mix of awe and humility, that he had been entrusted with a profound responsibility. The shelter staff moved around them with care, but now there was a lighter atmosphere. They monitored the puppy's vitals, administered nutrients slowly, and provided soft bedding. Every little sign of improvement, a faint wag of a tail, a deeper breath, a small blink of curiosity, brought relief and cautious optimism. Daniel observed closely, adjusting blankets and whispering words of encouragement. The puppies were fragile, yes, but their tiny movements told him something important. Survival wasn't just a possibility. It was becoming probable. Hours passed. Daniel remained present, unwilling to leave Grace's side. He brought her food and water, which she accepted cautiously, still wary from past neglect. She ate slowly, eyes flicking constantly toward her recovering pups, ensuring that nothing threatened them even for a moment. It was a mother's vigilance in its purest form, unrelenting, unyielding, powerful. During lulls in the flurry of shelter activity, Daniel found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The night had started as a routine patrol, a quiet drive through familiar streets, until an unexpected shadow, a German shepherd, had thrown his world into upheaval. Now, standing amid the faint warmth of sunrise, he understood that every step, every choice, every heartbeat had led to this delicate moment of survival and hope. By mid-morning, the puppies had gained enough strength to sit upright with support. Their tiny eyes focused on Grace, their movements more intentional, less feeble. One attempted a wobbly crawl toward Daniel, prompting him to lean forward and gently scoop it into his hands. He cradled the fragile creature close, feeling its warmth against his chest. "You're getting stronger," he whispered. "I'm proud of you." Grace watched closely, ears twitching, tail wagging slightly. Daniel could see the relief in her eyes. Her babies were safe, alive, thriving under his watch. And in that moment, he realized that his role had shifted. He was no longer just a rescuer. He was a partner in their healing, a guardian bridging the gap between despair and hope. The day continued with careful monitoring. Shelter staff noted the puppy's vital signs improving, offering slow, steady nourishment and gentle attention. Each small victory, a more confident step, a small squeak of curiosity, a wag of a tiny tail, was met with quiet cheers and reassuring pats from Daniel. He remained patient, understanding that recovery was a gradual process. The journey from fragile survival to full vitality would not be instantaneous. Yet every sign of life, every twitch of energy, was a triumph against the odds. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel found himself kneeling beside Grace once more. He studied her closely, noting the scars along her sides, evidence of a past filled with pain and neglect. Despite it all, she had survived. Despite the abandonment, the cold nights, the hunger, she had endured, and now she was healing alongside her puppies. "You're amazing," he whispered. "All of you." Grace leaned into his hand, her amber eyes meeting his. Daniel could feel a silent communication between them, a mutual acknowledgement of the bond formed in the darkness, solidified in survival. It was a connection that transcended words, forged in the shared experience of life's fragility and resilience. By evening, the puppies were stronger, able to wobble short distances under careful supervision. Daniel watched with a mix of pride and relief as Grace encouraged them, her protective instincts guiding every move. He realized then that this was the true miracle of the night. Not just that they had survived, but that they were thriving under the watchful eyes of a mother and a man who refused to let them falter. As the shelter quieted for the night, Daniel sat beside Grace, the two puppies nestled safely under heat lamps. The room was filled with a gentle warmth, both physical and emotional. He could feel the tension of the past night melting away, replaced by cautious optimism and the first real sense of hope. Daniel knew the road ahead would still be challenging. The puppies needed continued care, vaccinations, and socialization. Grace needed rehabilitation, love, and trust, rebuilt after the hardships of her past. But for the first time, the future seemed achievable. He reached down, gently stroking Grace's head. "You've done everything right," he murmured. "Now it's our turn to make sure you keep succeeding." She leaned into his hand, amber eyes softening with fatigue, yet filled with recognition. In that quiet moment, Daniel understood something profound. The bond between humans and animals was a delicate thread, woven with trust, respect, and love. And when nurtured, it had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Daniel remained by their side as the shelter lights dimmed, a silent sentinel guarding the fragile family he had rescued. He had learned that survival was not just a matter of chance, but of care, dedication, and unwavering resolve. And as he watched Grace and her pups resting, he felt a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment. They had survived the night. They had begun to heal. And together, they would face the challenges of the future, stronger for the trials they had endured. Hope, he realized, was not just a fleeting emotion. It was a choice, a determination to fight, to care, and to believe that life could flourish even after unimaginable hardship. And for Daniel, Grace, and her puppies, that choice had been made, and it had carried them from despair to the first fragile light of a brighter tomorrow. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance of care, patience, and quiet triumphs. Grace, once a skeletal shadow of a mother, began to fill out with steady meals and gentle exercise. Her scars remained, but they no longer defined her. She moved with strength and grace, every step a testament to her resilience. The shelter staff watched her transformation with awe, but Daniel was there every step of the way, witnessing the bond deepen between human and dog, mother and man. The puppies flourished under careful attention. Their tiny cries became playful yips, weak limbs grew strong, and curiosity replaced fear. They learned to wobble across soft blankets, stumble over toys, and follow Grace's careful guidance. Daniel spent hours sitting beside them, laughing softly as one tripped over its own paws, or nudged another in exploration. Every small victory was a reminder of how far they had come, from near death in a crumbling shed to thriving, lives full of energy. Grace never left their side. Even in play, she maintained a watchful gaze, nudging them gently, her tail wagging faintly with each milestone. Daniel noticed her eyes often flicking toward him as well, a subtle acknowledgement of trust. She had led him into the night, guided him through the shadows, and now she seemed to recognize him as a part of their survival story. One afternoon, Daniel crouched beside the heat lamp, holding the smallest pup who had once been the weakest. It wriggled in his hands, squirming toward Grace for comfort. He smiled softly, whispering, "Look at you now. Strong, brave, alive." The pup squeaked in reply, and Daniel felt warmth spread through him. He realized that the rescue had changed him as much as it had changed them. He had begun the night as an officer on a routine patrol, but he had ended it as a witness to life's fragility, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. Grace nudged him gently, her head resting briefly on his knee. Daniel scratched behind her ears, feeling her lean into the touch. She no longer approached him with desperation, but with quiet recognition and acceptance. They had shared a trial few could understand, and in it they had formed a connection that would endure long after the shelter's doors closed each day. The shelter staff began to talk about adoption plans. The puppies, now strong and healthy, were ready for new homes. Daniel felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. He had grown attached to them, to Grace, to the tiny lives she had nurtured against all odds. But he knew their purpose was to move forward, to thrive beyond the walls of the shelter. Yet, when he mentioned adoption possibilities, the staff paused at Grace. She was loyal, protective, and deeply bonded to her family, and Daniel wondered if he could imagine a future where she was without them. He realized in that moment that she was more than a dog. She was a survivor, a guide, a mother who had entrusted him with her most precious treasures. Weeks passed, and the puppies found loving homes, each carefully chosen for their commitment to care. Daniel was there for each adoption, watching as they left the shelter, tails wagging, eyes bright, and spirits alive. Grace observed each departure, her amber eyes tracking her children, but she remained calm, knowing they were safe and loved. Finally, the day came when Grace and Daniel were alone in the shelter, the quiet hum of activity replaced by a peaceful calm. She approached him slowly, tail wagging softly, and nudged his hand. He knelt beside her, speaking softly. "You've done everything right, Grace. Your babies are safe. And now, so are you." The vet smiled from across the room. "She's ready for a permanent home," she said. "She's strong, social, and bonded to humans. She's ready to thrive." Daniel paused. His heart beat fast. He had grown attached to Grace, to her courage and resilience, and he realized that he could not imagine her life without him. She had led him into the night, guided him through danger, and now she had helped him witness something extraordinary, the power of trust, love, and survival. "I think," he whispered, "we've earned each other." Grace tilted her head, amber eyes shining, as though she understood every word. In that moment, there was no need for adoption papers or contracts. They had formed a bond that transcended rules and regulations, forged in the crucible of life and death. Daniel signed the paperwork that afternoon, officially making Grace his companion. He carried her to the car, the memory of the night she had run to him still vivid, and he promised himself that he would honor the trust she had placed in him. She had risked everything to save her pups, and he would dedicate himself to keeping her safe and cherished for the rest of her life. The drive home was quiet, filled with a sense of peace that Daniel hadn't felt in years. Grace rested beside him, her head occasionally brushing his arm, her body relaxed for the first time since he had met her. He glanced over and smiled. She had endured so much, yet here she was, alive, thriving, and finally free from the shadows of her past. At his home, he prepared a cozy corner for her, soft blankets and toys, giving her space to explore and feel safe. Grace investigated slowly, nose twitching, tail wagging, before curling up in the corner with a contented sigh. Daniel watched her, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. The story of that night, the abandoned lot, the near death of the puppies, the desperate plea of a mother remained vivid in his mind. But now it was a story of triumph, resilience, and hope. A story that proved that even in the darkest circumstances, trust, courage, and love could prevail. Days turned to weeks, and the bond between Daniel and Grace grew stronger. They walked together each morning, she running ahead, then circling back, ears perked and eyes alert. He laughed softly as she nudged him toward the park, as if reminding him that life could be joyful again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Daniel sat on the porch with Grace beside him. Her head rested on his knee, eyes closed, tail flicking lazily. He reflected on the journey, the desperation, the fear, the midnight rescue, the hours of care, and realized something profound. They had saved each other. Grace had saved her pups, and in doing so, led Daniel to witness courage and resilience he could never have imagined. And Daniel had saved Grace, offering safety, care, and a new beginning. Together, they had turned tragedy into hope, despair into life, and fear into trust. He stroked her fur gently, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "We're going to have a good life. You've earned it." Grace stirred, lifting her head to nuzzle his hand, eyes meeting his in a gaze filled with understanding and gratitude. No words were necessary. Their shared history, forged in danger and struggle, spoke volumes. Daniel knew that life would continue to present challenges, medical checkups, neighborhood walks, the unexpected twists of fate, but he also knew that together they could face anything. He had learned that love, trust, and courage could survive even the darkest nights. And Grace had proven it. The night sky deepened above them, stars twinkling faintly, and Daniel realized that a story that had begun with desperation and heartbreak had ended with hope and renewal. Grace, once a stray fighting for survival, was now a companion, a friend, and a reminder that even in the face of adversity, life could flourish. He leaned back, letting the calm wash over him. Grace rested her head on his lap, content and trusting, her amber eyes closing in the glow of the porch light. Daniel smiled softly, feeling the warmth of life return to the smallest creatures he had ever met, and to himself. From abandoned lot to safe haven, from despair to hope, the journey had transformed all of them. And in that transformation, Daniel understood the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, saving a life means opening your heart and letting trust lead the way. Together, they had survived. Together, they would thrive. And for Daniel, Grace, and her once fragile puppies, the future finally felt bright.